5% of buildings in Europe are inefficient. And in fact, we're not going to be able to deliver against carbon efficiency, let alone, frankly, productivity and profitability for industry, unless we address this significant opportunity, really, to cut costs and improve productivity. But I think our company listed on the stock exchange is probably one of the faster growing companies, moving from 100 to 450 million in 18 months.
Jonathan, just to broaden this out a little bit, I mean, we are in a world that has not, since World War II, seen such levels of debt, and energy, and indeed green energy, are often reliant on government subsidies, favourable government policy in order to support it. Are you worried about the headwinds on that, and that the sector may end up getting a little bit neglected?
So this is one of the reasons we're so focused on energy efficiency. Energy efficiency actually helps to deliver energy to the point of use at a cheaper rate than the grid. It's more carbon efficient than the grid, and it actually improves resilience and reliability. So absolutely, to the point you've made, one of the key reasons we're so focused on this, and indeed why business and industry and government is increasingly focused on energy efficiency, is it's an incredible opportunity to reduce costs and improve productivity. These projects rarely rely on subsidy. They make great commercial sense, they improve profitability, and they're a tremendous opportunity for government to stimulate the economy post-COVID and to create jobs.
OK, well, we'll see what the post-COVID world has in store for us. Jonathan Maxwell from Sustainable Development Capital, thank you for your time on Sky News.
Right.
Coming up, still to come on Ian King Live, could companies rather than governments lead economies out of the current crisis? We'll be finding out. Stay with us.
Having a party.
I'm having a party, a girls' party. Yay, where are your drinks, girls?
It is nothing short but an amazing day today.
I wake up, sleep, eat, wake up, sleep, eat.
My name's Tony Nicholson. I'm a fitness coach and I'm an actor.
Want some coffee? No. You want some coffee? No.
Welcome back. The coronavirus pandemic has seen governments across the globe provide companies with unprecedented amounts of financial support. However, some experts say companies should now be taking responsibility for leading economies out of the current crisis. One of them is Professor Colin Mayer. He's an expert in corporate finance, and he's been speaking to my colleague Ian King.
Injections of capital into the corporate sectors around the world from governments in the form of loans and grants and tax breaks has just been phenomenal. And so there's a recognition that that's been granted on the back of public support for assisting companies at this stage. And if we go back to the financial crisis, that public support for bailing out the banks was initially there, but it quickly evaporated when people realized that banks were not actually responding by appreciating what their social licenses to operate were. So there's a very important agenda that companies do not make the same mistake this time round and realize that they have to rise to the challenge and demonstrate that they are picking up the idea that they are going to lead economies out of the current crisis, and to do so in a way that supports their stakeholders as well as their shareholders in the round, including their employees, their societies, their customers, and the environment. So it is critical that companies get on the front foot in terms of addressing this.
Implicit in what you've just said there, Colin, is that shareholders may have to resign themselves to lower returns in future.
That's not obvious because there's a lot of evidence to suggest that purpose-driven companies are more successful companies in every respect in terms of driving forward an agenda that engages people, that attracts customers, that attracts employees, so that they're able to essentially have a more engaged workforce, more loyal customers, more supportive societies, and more reliable suppliers. Now, that means that one of the elements of focusing on this is to generate greater revenues and potentially lower costs, and therefore more profits.
You've been watching Ian King Live. There's plenty more content for you on the Sky News website. Should you want it, I'll be back at 1:30.
This is Sky News at 10 o'clock. Our headlines. Britain's biggest shopping centre owner, Intu, on the brink of collapse, putting thousands of jobs at risk. Police officers are attacked by revellers in West London amid warnings of a summer of disorder in the UK.
These illegal raves are obviously unacceptable, and attacks on the police that we saw earlier this week are also unacceptable.
Keep your distance. The Health Secretary threatens to shut Britain's beaches if people continue to flout safety restrictions. A new roadmap to get performing arts back on stage. And painting the town red. Liverpool fans celebrate their first top-flight league title in 30 years. Good morning. Some of the UK's biggest shopping centres could be under threat following Intu's announcement that it is likely to appoint administrators. The country's largest shopping centre owner, which attracts 35 million visitors a year, says talks with its creditors have stalled, putting thousands of jobs in jeopardy. The Intu Group owns 17 shopping centres in the UK, including the Trafford Centre in Manchester, the Metro Centre in Gateshead and Lakeside in Essex. Its shopping centres make nearly £6 billion in retail sales per year. It directly employs 3,000 people, and its collapse would impact regional economies across the country, with a further 102,000 people working in its shopping centres. Sky's Sam Washington is in the city this morning.
Yes, thanks, Adam. We've been keeping a watching brief on this one. As you say, Intu, it's not exactly a household name, but you've probably been very close to it being the country's biggest owner of shopping centres, as you mentioned there. It's got a big problem because it's got £4.5 billion of debt, and the current market value of the company is about £30 million. So that tells you the size of the problem that they have. They needed to negotiate with their manifold creditors some sort of restructuring of that debt, and time is running out. Ironically, time running out just as non-essential shops are about to reopen on Monday. So what we've been told from the company is that unfortunately insufficient alignment and agreement has been achieved on restructuring this debt, and therefore the next move is likely to involve the appointment of administrators. Well, we know that KPMG has been on standby to manage that administration. It's going to be asking those creditors for £12 million to cover the basic costs of keeping those shopping centres, 17 of them in the country, open. Or Intu says it's going to have to close some of those shopping centres. But it's a complex restructuring. It's a very complex debt structure, and it's going to be really difficult to sort it out. Earlier, I was speaking to Julie Palmer from insolvency expert Begbie's Trainer, and she agreed with that.
When you're dealing with this sort of situation where you're trying to manage the differing interests of a number of stakeholders, it's very, very difficult to get those different interests onto the common ground on the table. And I think that's where talks have broken down. So the RNS that was released this morning confirmed that they are in talks to appoint administrators. It's going to be an extremely complex administration. If you think about what Intu does, it keeps these shopping centres open, it provides the services, the lighting, the cleaning, etc. So the suggestion is there's going to need to be about £12 million put on the table just to keep these shopping centres alive.
Well, we've got till midnight, Adam, till we know about that. I mean, this is a business that's been really hit by COVID, but COVID has really been the amplifier of existing problems. We've had closures of shops, retailers not being able to pay their rents, and it transpired this week only 15% of quarterly rents were being paid by those retailers. But it's important to note that this is not just a COVID story. There were really big problems in place. As I was saying, £4.5 billion of debt. And if we take a look at the share price, it really tells you all you need to know about the challenges faced by this business. More than £3 a share back there in 2015. It's now effectively a penny stock, trading at about 2p a share now. It's suffered sort of headwinds coming from falling footfall there as people gravitate to retailers instead. And the shopping centres that were looking a little bit tired, and also many retailers themselves going to the wall, and lots of empty shops within those shopping centres. They posted a £2 billion loss, incidentally, their last annual report, and there was a 5-year turnaround plan in place. They may run out of time, Adam, so we're keeping a watching brief on it, as I said. But if it falls into administration, then it will certainly be the most significant COVID-related collapse we've had to date.
Samantha, thank you. More from you later, including at 1:30 here on Sky News. Well, police chiefs have warned that their officers could be facing a summer of disorder following violent clashes in London. Officers in the capital came under attack for a second night in a row last night while trying to disperse crowds at an unlicensed music event in Notting Hill. Scotland Yard says objects were thrown at officers, but there were no reports of serious injury. Extra police in protective gear were deployed across the capital overnight to deal with illegal street parties, including an unlicensed music event on Streatham Common. The Metropolitan Police tweeted that officers had engaged with a large number of those in attendance, and the crowd has now almost entirely dispersed. This comes just days after 22 police officers were injured while trying to close down a street party in Brixton. Police vehicles there were smashed and officers pelted with bottles. As the lockdown eases, police across the country are having to deal with illegal parties. And this morning, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner said the police will be prepared to protect the public over the weekend.
We've seen some very peaceful, in some instances, but also some protests which have become very violent. And we've seen large numbers of people completely flouting the health regulations, seeming not to care at all about their own or their family's health, wanting to have large parties. It's hot. Some people have drunk far too much. Some people are just angry and aggressive, and some people are plain violent. We will be prepared this weekend. We have officers all over London working hard again to try to keep the peace and to protect our public from violence and disorder.
Well, let's get more from our political correspondent, Tom Rayner, who's in Westminster. Tom, whether it's the hot weather, the end of lockdown, this is becoming a problem for the authorities, and some are blaming the messaging from the Prime Minister.
It is becoming a problem, and indeed the Environment Secretary, George Eustace, was speaking to Sky News this morning and acknowledged that months of restrictions, as he put it, have left people frustrated. But he echoed what we heard there from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, saying that illegal gatherings are obviously unacceptable. It does, the government, we do know, are reviewing whether or not sentencing guidelines can be changed to increase the sentence that someone would serve if they are involved in attacks on police officers or other critical workers. The Home Secretary announced that several weeks ago. But clearly, whether or not that would work as a deterrent is highly in question. And there is also the kind of broader concern that government has about the social distancing measures beyond these examples of hostilities towards the police. We also saw the pictures, didn't we, on Bournemouth Beach, the celebrations outside Anfield. All of these things do undermine that message of social distancing needing to be continued, the message that the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, has also restated, not just at the press conference earlier in the week, but on Twitter yesterday, really warning people that if the guidelines are not followed, then a second peak is likely. But it was interesting, Adam, earlier that George Eustace also did acknowledge that because the government is trying to take this phased approach, that there is a risk that the message does get muddied. This is what he told us.
It's inevitably the case that as you start to ease these restrictions and you drop some, the ones that are left sometimes look, inconsistent with that. And it's a very difficult thing, because if we were just to remove all of the restrictions, then this virus would start to creep back up. So we have to do things carefully, cautiously, and incrementally. But I do appreciate that as you do that, people sometimes see an inconsistency, and that's why you get these constant questions about the rules and the guidance that is left.
Tom, and meanwhile, the Labour leader has internal party politics very much on his agenda following his sacking from the shadow cabinet of Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Yes, Keir Starmer is having a virtual meeting with MPs from the Socialist Campaign Group this morning. It started around 9 o'clock, we believe. The Socialist Campaign Group is a caucus on the left of the Labour Party. It's currently led by Richard Bergen, the former Shadow Justice Secretary, and they will be speaking to Keir Starmer about that decision to dismiss Rebecca Long-Bailey following her retweeting that interview with Maxine Peake in The Independent yesterday, in which the actress suggested that Israeli Secret Service provided training for the police in the US on the idea of using your knees on people's necks, which is firstly inaccurate, but also was seen by Keir Starmer's team as a conspiracy theory, an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory, suggesting that the Jewish state is somehow responsible for all the ills in the world. Now, what is interesting, Adam, is how the left of the party decide upon a way forward following on from this. Rebecca Long-Bailey herself has spoken to the Daily Mirror, and while she says that she's incredibly upset at the decision that Keir Starmer has taken, she believes that the only way the party will go forward is if it is unified, and she says that is why it's important to me to make the choice not to be critical about the way I may have been treated. But we are seeing John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, endorsing a petition to try and have Rebecca Long-Bailey reinstated. We've seen people like Len McCluskey, the Unite General Secretary, saying that this is an overreaction to what he called a confected row. I think what will be important is how those different responses from the left end up determining the course, and whether or not they remain slightly divided about how they respond, or whether they single in on a single way of going forward, whether Rebecca Long-Bailey becomes a unifying force on the backbenches for that faction, or whether ultimately they are unable to regroup, as it were. Keir Starmer, though, will be satisfied that his pledge, as he became leader of the Labour Party, to treat dealing with the anti-Semitism issue as a primary objective, will to some degree have been satisfied, given the reaction that he's had from the Jewish Labour movement, the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council, all of whom have welcomed the fact that he took swift action against Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Tom Rayner, thank you very much indeed. And we're going to be speaking to Ruth Smeege of the Jewish Labour movement later on. And as Tom was saying, the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has threatened to close down beaches if they become too crowded and social distancing isn't followed. This comes after thousands of people flocked to the coast on the hottest day of the year yesterday, with a major incident declared in Bournemouth. Well, Sam Holder is on Bournemouth Beach for us this morning. Not adding to the overcrowding, I hope.
No, it's another lovely day in Bournemouth, but if you take a look, there's a few people out on the beach, but nothing like compared to this time yesterday and throughout the day yesterday, when there were thousands and thousands of people here. The entire beach behind me was filled with people, some in groups 20 to 30 strong, and social distancing just wasn't possible. It led, as you said, to a major incident being declared. There were so many people coming from across the south here that social distancing wasn't possible. And I spoke earlier to the local MP, Tobias Elwood, who said that he wanted a national governmental response in future to overcrowding at public places.
The government wasn't there and will only step in when there's a request. But it was very, very clear that up to about dinner time in the evening that they were deluged and extra assets would have been required. Thankfully, the situation calmed down. Today is not so busy, but ultimately we need to be prepared that things could go this way again.
Well, there was a great deal of concern amongst local residents I spoke to yesterday that this might become the centre of a second wave because so many people had travelled here and social distancing wasn't taking place. We've heard Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary, has said the government can, in theory, close public places like beaches if they're too overcrowded, but that the government would be reluctant to do so.
Thank you very much indeed, Sam. Well, there were thousands of Liverpool fans on the streets outside their stadium last night to celebrate the club winning the Premier League title. For a while, there had been doubt over whether the season would be allowed to be completed due to the lockdown. Sky's Martha Kellner reports.
The skies above Anfield tinted red. A city in celebration after finally ending 30 years of hurt. It wasn't a conventional title victory. The inevitable delayed 3 months by the coronavirus. The winning goal scored by another team 220 miles away. But on Merseyside, that didn't matter.
It means the whole world to me. It feels personal because it's from my granddad, who were lost in 2015, and it's like, it's really, really close to my heart, this.
Last year we were there, this year we're on top. We're the best. 6 titles, we need everything.
It's unbelievable. There's only one way to describe it.
Liverpool were relying on Manchester City dropping points at Stamford Bridge. With the game poised at 1-1, a moment of ill-discipline from City's Fernandinho, Chelsea's Willian sending the resulting penalty into the top corner and sending the league title to Liverpool for a 19th time. Some of the Liverpool team, including defender Virgil van Dijk and midfielder Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, watched together. Their manager was more emotional.
It's a big moment. I have no real words, to be honest. It's such a big moment. I'm completely overwhelmed. I never would have thought that it would feel like this. I had no idea. And it's just big. Sorry, gentlemen. See you. All the best.
Only 4 members of Liverpool's current squad were alive when they last won a domestic title in April 1990, led by former manager Kenny Dalglish.
Jurgen's been absolutely fantastic on the pitch with the players, but also with everybody connected with the club. The way he's got time and respect for people is a credit to himself and a great help to everybody. And that's no coincidence that you get success when you have that.
You can see how much this title means to the people of Liverpool, or the red half at least. They've got used to winning title after title, year after year, and then this 30-year wait, which is what makes this one all the more sweeter. Even the very youngest fans waited up to witness the party. Social distancing went out of the window as half a city seemed to descend on the stadium. They partied into the night, but the celebrations will last many weeks. Martha Kellner, Sky News, Anfield.
And Sky's Tom Parmenter is in Liverpool outside Anfield this morning. Two things, really, the football team's achievement and also how they're going to celebrate in this time of COVID.
We had a flavour of how they celebrated there in Martha's report. The police didn't want them to do that, but thousands of fans did come to Anfield, and the debris has all been picked up this morning. The aroma has been washed away by the rain. It was a significant party. Concerns, of course, about the current restrictions and the fact that social distancing doesn't happen here, it doesn't happen on a Bournemouth beach, it doesn't happen at a West London street party. That almost is a different debate. What they were marking last night is the end of 3 decades waiting for this title, 3 decades in which they've had to watch Arsenal, Manchester United, particularly, of course, Manchester United. That has hurt Liverpool fans, going on to win so many titles, Chelsea and more recently Manchester City. But Liverpool are back where they all believe they belong, at the top of the Premier League as champions. The champions of Europe as well, given their victory last season in the Champions League, and also world club champions as well. It is a great achievement by Jurgen Klopp. You could see last night he was in tears in the interviews that he was doing, just how much this city, this club means to him. And the challenge laid down by many of the former players who last won the title here back in 1990 is to go on and do it again, as the great managers of this football club have done previously, defending the title and then hammering home that dominance that they've managed to create through this season. But of course, the levels of performance that Manchester City have shown at times this season, of course, other clubs pushing hard as well. It will not be easy, but Jurgen Klopp now very much settled in his role as one of the true greats at Anfield, and many Liverpool fans just want to see him continue that Klopp era that is now starting to deliver the real trophies and silverware that they want.
Tom Parmenter, thank you very much. Well, let's get more now on the reaction to the sacking of Rebecca Long-Bailey by the new Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who removed her from the shadow cabinet yesterday for sharing an article which contained what was described as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Well, joining me now is the former parliamentary chair of the Jewish Labour movement, Ruth Smeeth. Ruth Smeeth, first of all, was it the right decision by Sir Keir Starmer to sack Rebecca Long-Bailey?
It absolutely was. I think we've been waiting for leadership from the leader of the Labour Party for 5 years. Keir, in his last 12 weeks, has shown more and said all the right things. And this was his first test, really, and he's done exactly the right thing by saying enough. Jews should not be a political football within the Labour Party. I think this sends a message to the wider leadership, to the wider membership, that we need a proper change in our culture and that this issue needs to go away. So I'm really impressed by Keir's actions. I've been begging for this kind of action for years from the former leader, and Keir has done it. I don't understand why Rebecca Long-Bailey has chosen to act in this way. I think she needs to reflect on why she was so adamant about this particular issue, and look and reflect and find a way back, because we do need to unite the Labour Party.
Could I just ask you to explain why what she did was anti-Semitic?
Well, I think it's actually, if you look at the actual article, even Maxine Peake has apologised today. Amnesty International have had to say they've never said such a thing. They're saying that, or the article suggested, that Israel was responsible for training the officers who killed George Floyd. Israel, of all countries, 6,000 miles away, responsible for killing someone, had nothing to do with them. It is an anti-Semitic trope about power and control. And it also was trying to build a hierarchy of racism and set Jews and blacks against each other. That is nonsense, and it shouldn't be accepted in the Labour Party. What we need is to make sure there is no hierarchy of racism, that everybody's coming together rather than becoming even more polarised.
What would you say to those who might argue that it is possible, although that mistake acknowledged was made in this case, to criticise Israel without being anti-Semitic?
I think it absolutely is right and proper to criticise Israel without being anti-Semitic. I am definitely not a fan of the Netanyahu government. If I lived in Israel, I'd be campaigning against them. But I don't live in Israel. I'm a British citizen and I'm responsible for what happens in this country, not there. Therefore, I have no culpability for what happens over there. And there has been, over the last few years, complete... they have failed miserably to separate British Jews from the Israeli government, and they have failed to do that. And that's been a theme of some of the anti-Semitic problem that the Labour Party's had over the last 5 years.
Do you think Sir Keir was looking for an opportunity to stamp down on his opponents within the Labour Party, basically the Corbynistas?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. Keir came with a clear platform and a clear mandate of unity. People from across factions within the Labour Party voted to support him and make him leader. And he had done everything he can to do that. I don't understand why Rebecca has acted in this way. I don't understand why she chose this issue to be the issue and why she didn't just delete the tweet first thing yesterday morning. Her second tweet actually was much worse than her first one. But I don't understand why she'd have done that. I think she needs to reflect on her own actions. I think everyone needs just to breathe a little and calm down and remember that Keir has a huge mandate and that we all need to get behind him.
Do you think everyone is going to calm down? I mean, this could actually lead to more infighting within the Labour Party, couldn't it?
I think it could, and that would be ridiculous. I mean, Jews do not want to be a political football in the Labour Party, and for it to be yet again about anti-Semitism, for it to be yet again about the role of Jews in the Labour Party is just a disgrace. So for me, we've got the EHRC that arrives next week, probably. We've got
That's the inquiry into anti-Semitism, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll know exactly what has been judged about how Jewish members have been treated within the Labour Party in the coming weeks. Keir needed to send a message, and he's been very, very strong on saying that he wanted to stamp out anti-Semitism. There should be no place for it in any political party, as there shouldn't be a place for racism in a political party. And there is no need for this to continue to be a thing. We all want it to go away. I can't tell you how desperate I am to come on this programme and not to talk about anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
Can I ask you, as things stand, do you think it is right to say to Jewish people now that they can, with confidence, support the Labour Party if they want to?
I can. The nicest text message I got yesterday was from one of my friends who had resigned with Luciana from the party, who rejoined yesterday. It is time to come home. It's time to put all of this to bed. And, we were members of the Labour Party and are members of the Labour Party for reasons that have got nothing to do with our identity and our faith. And as soon as those issues stop being an issue within the Labour Party, it will be a safe space again. It is time to come home and make sure it is.
Just asking you, saying Luciana Burgess rejoined the Labour Party?
No, I didn't. I said one of my friends who left when Luciana left.
Oh, right. OK, sorry. I misheard that. Just wanted to clarify that.
A very big story, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
OK, thank you. This is Sky News. Coming up next, the 5-point plan to get the creative industries creating again. As the UK slowly lifts lockdown restrictions, some industries have had to be more patient than others. Amongst them, the world of the performing arts. The Culture Secretary, Oliver Dowden, says he's desperate to see live shows return, and he's created a 5-stage plan to get the creative industries working again. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Lucy Cotter, reports on the roadmap to recovery.
Oh, it's so strange being back in here. I think it's been 12 weeks since I've been here last.
Closed for weeks, with no audiences, no money and no idea of when they can reopen. Theatres like the Arcola are desperate and say they need more than just a roadmap from the government.
I think they've acknowledged that it's going to be some time before theatres are at the point where they can reopen. But we knew that, and actually what we needed was, and what we still need, is clarity on what the government policy is on how we're going to reopen safely and when.
And presumably you need dates, you need a time frame.
We need a time frame. We need to know when it's going to be safe, and we need to know how it's going to be financially viable. And until that time, we need to know that the government's got our back.
The Culture Secretary's roadmap consists of 5 stages. Stage 1, allowing rehearsals and training with no audience, is already allowed, as is Stage 2, which allows performances for broadcast. Stage 3 will see performances take place outdoors with an audience. 4 allows them indoors with a limited distanced audience. And at Stage 5, performances will be allowed both indoors and outdoors with a larger audience. Missing, crucially, is the time frame.
We have said by the beginning of July, we need absolute clarity on the dates that we are planning towards. And let's be clear, we also need clarity from the government on what support they're able to offer this industry.
And actor Simon Callow believes the government's plan lacks urgency, given the industry is on its deathbed.
I'm glad that he's made it rather than not making any statement, because the silence has been deafening up till now. But we have to deal with the current situation, critical current situation, and B, we have to have a much more rigorous plan for how to get back. I'm not pretending it's easy. It's really seriously problematic, but we have to really devise something. Otherwise, these precious aspects of our national cultural life will truly wither and die.
70% of theatres could close completely before Christmas if they can't reopen safely. So time really is running out for the sector. Lucy Cotter, Sky News.
This is Sky News. Coming up, I'll look at the latest opinions in the newspapers, including this cartoon in The Times, with Keir Starmer as a rather bloodthirsty grommet. Well, time for a look at the latest opinions in today's newspapers. And in the newspaper, Stephen Bush says the sacking of Rebecca Long-Bailey is a true test of Sir Keir Starmer's resolve. It shows that he understands Labour's anti-Semitism problem. Bayek Gromit, the Labour leader, is a rather bloodthirsty killer in Peter Brook's cartoon in The Times, a Rebecca Long-Bailey rabbit lying dead there. In the Daily Telegraph, Fraser Nelson says an overmighty number 10 is proving poorly suited to handling coronavirus, with Dominic Cummings centralising reforms, having deprived ministers of much-needed flexibility in a time of crisis. Boris Johnson's alert-level ice lolly is melting in the hot sun, in Bob's cartoon in The Telegraph. Larry Elliott in The Guardian says we are getting through one crisis, but another is about to hit us as it's crunch time for the economy. Dominic Cummings is right about the failings of the civil service, according to Philip Collins in The Times. He says reform of Whitehall is long overdue, but the Prime Minister's advisor will find that bad habits and self-preservation are deeply entrenched. And Jill Kirby in the Daily Telegraph warns of a summer of disorder and unrest ahead. The rising tide of violence on the streets is a greater threat to the public than a few crowded beaches, she suggests. Ian Martin in The Times finally says it's time to reject the intolerance of woke warriors, as the treatment of Baroness Nicholson by the Booker trustees shows the growing threat of groupthink to civil society. Well, joining me today to look through those are the founder of Blue Labour, Maurice Glassman, and the director of the British Foreign Policy Group, Sophia Gaston. Well, let's start with Rebecca Long-Bailey and the various comments on it. Stephen Bush, amongst others, says that it shows that Keir Starmer is getting to grips with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. What do you think, Sophia?
Well, I think this has been a very dramatic event. This is the Shadow Education Secretary who was sacked after sharing a piece yesterday that not only defended the legacy of Jeremy Corbyn, but also included a rather anti-Semitic trope. And I think there was some question when Starmer took over the Labour leadership about the degree to which he would offer some kind of continuity with the Corbyn era. And I think what he's made clear with this decision is that anti-Semitism is going to be completely, treated with no tolerance policy. And I think he's also, in a way, kind of shown that much of the inertia and the feet dragging that took place under Corbyn's leadership on this issue was entirely unnecessary, because with one swift hand, he has said, not only do we believe that anti-Semitism is unacceptable, but that we can actually recognize its many kind of pernicious and perhaps even more subtle forms.
Lord Glassman, what do you make of this development?
Yeah, I'm roughly in agreement with that. I think it's a political statement also that the Corbyn left is really no part of the Starmer coalition. I think that's important. And also there's the whole issue with going back to schools. Is Rebecca Long-Bailey was much closer to the teaching unions, which have great reservations about going back to school. The leadership have committed to going back, so it also deals with that. And it's a very symbolic move that communicates a clear break with the Corbyn era.
So you think it really does send a signal about the direction Keir Starmer's taking the Labour Party? I suppose the question is, will he manage to take those people close to Jeremy Corbyn with him?
Well, I think he's indicated that he doesn't much care. He refused a meeting with the campaign group yesterday to discuss the issue. So it's a very strong statement that that part of the party is not really part of his political coalition. He's much closer to the soft left, and he's building a coalition with them.
Do you think what Rebecca Long-Bailey did was a political hanging offence?
No, I mean, not in normal circumstances. I think she tweeted approval of an article that was very pro-Corbyn that she barely read, but Starmer seized on it as a very important symbolic moment to send that message.
Do you see it that way, Sophia, that he was decided to send that message and really Rebecca Long-Bailey paid rather a big price?
Well, I think that Starmer clearly recognises the immense damage that's been done around, the anti-Semitism issue to the Labour Party. I mean, many people of Jewish heritage just fundamentally do not believe that they can support the Labour Party until there's some really decisive action on this. He has actually, of course, sort of instigated this new commission. There's a big inquiry into it. And I think that actually a no-tolerance policy, he believes, is probably the only way in which he can build back that respect and trust with the Jewish community. We know that one of his sort of first acts after becoming leader was actually to convene leaders of the Jewish community. And I think so he's very much showing a strong degree of intent on this issue. We don't have a clear sense of his full policy platform yet, but we know that there is going to be a clean break with the Corbyn era, at least on this issue.
Now, Lord Glassman, we've got an interesting pair of articles. We've got Fraser Nelson, who says he's a fan and a friend of Dominic Cummings, actually saying that his centralising instincts have damaged dealing with coronavirus and its consequences, whereas Phil Collins, who is a a frequent critic of Dominic Cummings, actually says he's right in wanting to brush aside the civil service and have a more streamlined central control of government. Where do you stand?
Well, I stand on the fundamental confusion and lack of definition now of the government story and the government position. So that's right. Fraser Nelson saying, well, give ministers more control. Phil Collins, true to his New Labour heritage, wants to see a beefed up central sort of unit of power that combines the Treasury and Number 10. But what we don't know is how the government is going, and this sort of links to Larry Elliott's piece. What is the economic strategy? How are they going to redistribute power to the regions? How are they going to have a targeted regional policy that's going to cement their new class coalition? So I see both articles as manifestations of government lack of definition and confusion. What
do you think, Sophia? Do we need more centralisation or less?
Well, it's really depending on what that centralisation is going to look like. I mean, there's the kind of spoken wheel model of government. I mean, I think that to some extent it could make sense to have centralised things a bit during a pandemic of this nature, where it was just extraordinary, unfolding in a way that was deeply unpredictable, and I suppose wanting to have that kind of centralised control. I think the question is, how does this transition into the big renewal and recovery project on the other side? I think because this kind of degree of structural reform that the government is hoping for is so immense, if you think about the Levelling Up project and so on, the question is, can that actually be achieved if you're devolving power into these different departments? And so I think that that's really all yet to be seen.
It has to be said, Lord Glassman, Larry Elliott is normally pretty gloomy, but he's gloomier than ever because of the impact of COVID on the economy. What do you think of his central argument, which is that the government's going to have to go on spending in a targeted way to keep the economy going?
Well, I think on this, he's completely right, and he signals the fundamental issue, I think, which is what's going to be the economic strategy of the government after this. He signals that there's going to be a really major rise in unemployment. That's one aspect. But the government haven't defined what are the industries that are going to be the backbone of recovery. Just to say to Sophie, the third position is that there's a redistribution of power to the regions so that they can play a central role in this economic recovery. That's not defined. So I think that Larry Elliott's right. How is the unemployment response going to feed into the wider economic strategy of renewing the neglected regions of our country?
Sophia, where do you stand on this? I mean, is it a question of having to go on spending and borrowing, even though we don't have any money?
Well, I think Larry Elliott's point is here that the Chancellor has put forward some pretty extraordinary sort of crisis measures to keep the economy afloat and to keep people employed over the course of the sort of first phase of this pandemic. But we are approaching a kind of cliff edge with that. We know the furlough scheme ends in October, and that many of the people who are on that scheme, there will not be jobs waiting for them on the other side, and many businesses won't be able to close their doors. There's also really long-term effects for many businesses, and I think what he's calling for here is essentially saying, this is not 2008. This is a fundamental structural interruption to our economy with very long-term consequences. And he's essentially asking the Chancellor to set out some measures that will move beyond this crisis phase of the pandemic into the transition and recovery phase on the other side.
And finally, Ian Martin talking about wokeness. This is following the decision by the Booker board to disband the honorary trustees, apparently because Baroness Nicholson, the former MP and MEP, made some old-style feminist comments about trans people. What do you make of all these purges? And, of course, as Ian Martin says, been a lot of criticism and calls for action against J.K. Rowling as well, Lord Glassman.
Well, I think this is part of the general confusion. I mean, for example, universities are in really bad financial condition. It's entirely possible that between 30 and 40 universities will go bankrupt in August. And how does that feed into what we spoke about earlier? which is the government. Should it let them go bankrupt, turn them into vocational colleges, make that part of a productivity agenda? And also that could be part of the government culture war of closing down universities as essentially hotbeds of this culture.
What do you think, Sophia? I mean, you know, closing down things, shutting people out, is that a good idea?
I mean, I think there's a lot of concern around the creep of this cancel culture. And I think that we need to make a really clear distinction. There are conversations around people's human rights and dignity. That's not something that should be up for debate. That's universal. But I think a lot of the policy interpretations of, I suppose, how we adapt to this new, much more socially liberal society, I think those policy questions need to have space for debate in our society. And I think that there's been a really unhelpful conflation with those two, where conversations around, the way in which policy makers are interpreting these things, whether that's in gender-neutral bathrooms or so on, actually becomes infused with this very emotive quality because, it's as if that people's dignity is at stake. And I think that we need to just make sure that we can create a separation between those conversations, make it very clear what's not up for debate, but then make sure that we're allowing space for people to really discuss these things, because I think it's incredibly dangerous to get to a situation where we've narrowed the Overton window to such a degree that people just feel as though they cannot engage with some of these things, because I actually think that it's quite important for good policy making that we actually give that space for debate.
Thank you both very much indeed. Lots of ideas flowing around this morning. This is Sky News. Coming up next, as the government is urged to release its plans for so-called air bridges ahead of the summer holidays, I'm going to speak to Turkey's Culture and Tourism Minister.
In the middle of a national health emergency, doctors have made decisions about who lives and who doesn't.
We all agreed that this lady needed help and it was completely denied.
In this pandemic, we look at whether the elderly were placed at the back of the queue when it came to receiving hospital treatment.
How do you go and tell someone that thinks they could be treated because they've just got a chest infection that they're going to die?
The government is under pressure to release its plans for so-called air bridges as soon as possible in a bid to get the air travel industry started ahead of the summer holidays. These links would allow Britons to travel to certain destinations without needing to quarantine for 14 days on their return to the UK. Some countries are already in talks about setting up air bridges, including Turkey. And Turkey's Minister of Culture and Tourism, Mehmet Ersoy, joins me now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Minister. What can you tell us about the state of negotiations about an air bridge between Turkey and the UK?
Okay, we discussed with Vice Minister, who is responsible from tourism operations, and this weekend we also invited the ambassadors from 54 countries to Antalya, and also some press members to Antalya to experience the certification program and security program of Turkey. And I hope they also wrote a report to their ministers. And now we are waiting the end result.
Would you like Turkey to be included in the countries that can have travel with the UK without having a quarantine?
As Turkey, we are ready for tourism operations because we are the first and best detailed certification program, safe travel certification program in Europe. And for example, our certification program has more than 138 criteria, and the certification is done especially European origin companies like TÜV, like Royal Cert, like Bureau Veritas. They are international companies, and especially we invited ambassadors and some European press to experience this system. And I heard their opinion, and they said it is the best system until now on we saw.
So right now British tourists and second homeowners welcome to go to Turkey?
Yes, especially I also want to give you some numbers, especially English visitors visit our holiday resort areas, resort cities like Antalya, like Muğla. With Muğla, I mean Marmaris, Fethiye, Dalaman. And on those cities, especially, the case numbers are very low. For example, the corona cases started in Antalya, in Turkey, 11 of March. And from 11 of March until today, the total case in Antalya is 522. For example, in Muğla, 308. In Aydın, 276. And the new cases in Antalya, daily new case is around 5-6 daily. And in, for example, in Muğla, 2-3 cases. So the numbers are very low, especially in the resort cities. And those cities are the cities which especially British visitors visit.
Yeah, it's certainly the case. I mean, according to the Johns Hopkins International Dashboard, Turkey's incidence of COVID has been much lower than the UK's, just over 5,000 deaths and 193 confirmed tests. Given that, when people come from the UK to Turkey, are they subjected to any quarantine or health searches?
Turkey especially has very new and very big city hospitals, especially in the big cities and also in the resort cities. And this is our big advantage to fight against coronavirus. And the results are because of those hospitals and especially medical human resources power. The results are for Turkey very successful. Also, to guarantee for the expenses, medical expenses, we created also a new insurance package, which we called COVID insurance for Turkey.com. And with this package, it's easy to buy it from internet and from airline internet web pages. For example, for 7 overnights, it starts with €3,000 and you just need to pay €15, up to €7,000 and just for paying €23. And the hospitals are new, the medical human resources are very powerful, and we also have a COVID insurance for Turkey package. Altogether, the system is working very well, and also the safety program started, safety certification program started 1st of June, and most of the hotels, at that time more than 800 hotels involved to this program, and we hope in 1 month more than 2,000 hotels will have this certification.
So your message is you're welcome to come to Turkey.
Yes, of course, we are waiting. We are ready. Also from some countries, operations and flights started to Turkey.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for your time. This is Sky News. Coming up in the next hour, Britain's biggest shopping centre owner, Inchew, on the brink of possible collapse. We'll have more.